All right, welcome back, JE Live. I'm Jake Ellenbogen, and joining me is the film master himself, Alex Rollins. How we doing, man? Happy to have you on.
Doing good, man. Thank you. Appreciate it, Jake, man. Looking forward to talking some ball. I've been grinding a lot of Jared Goff film today, so
Ooh,
feeling a little off a little bit, I suppose. Just going through him, but yeah, man, excited to talk some ball. Get ready to get into it.
absolutely. And before we get into it, everyone be sure if you're on YouTube right now, you can hit a new tab and you can go and you can subscribe to my guy, Alex Rollins. He does an amazing job, does all sorts of film breakdowns, stuff that people like me, I've tried to get into, but I cannot dive into anywhere near the level of you. So, do appreciate what you do. And guys, be sure to go subscribe, at least at the end of this, if not right now. So, Alex, tell me a little bit about what you're doing right now, because you mentioned you watched Jared Goff film. You have an awesome video breaking down the Brandon Staley defense and what Brandon Staley did for the Rams and how they were just so, they became so dominant last year. Out of the blue. You talk about an organization that's had the fearsome foursome, and I'm not even sure the fearsome foursome was the best defense in this organization, because last year they had something I had never seen. But what are you working on right now?
Yeah, so I just started today. I start every Monday, and I put a film breakdown out every Saturday. And I just started studying Jared Goff and just some of the games where he struggled a little more this last 2020 season, and then kind of what the offense is going to look like going forward next year with, of course, Matthew Stafford, and going back to some of his 2019 film because with Daryl Bevel and whatnot, some similarities in the scheme and to what Bevel does with McVay in terms of the play action, different type of concepts they use. So really diving into that, really getting to what Goff, why McVay maybe made the decision to make this move, and where Goff struggled and where Stafford can kind of fill that in, and how things are going to look in 2021.
Yeah, that's great. I really do appreciate the work that you put in, and it's important to, first off, you can always, by watching film, you can always find tendencies. And when I first dove into Jared Goff, and I was watching him as a fan every Sunday, and then I dive into the tape and I can watch him objectively and not necessarily as a fan, but more trying to analyze. And you can see different tendencies of his and how he'll lean towards a Cooper Kupp, or he'll lean towards his safety blanket. And he's not a guy that's willing to, take that shot, whereas somebody like Matthew Stafford is. And so that's why I'm not really shocked at all. They went out and they got Tutu Atwell. Unfortunately, we find out today he's on the COVID list. And then they, went out and got Deshaun Jackson. It's not a shock to me that now they're like, okay, well, since Goff is gone and he didn't really want to test the, defenses down the field, we have Matthew Stafford, who's arguably one of the best deep ball throwers of the last 10 years in this league, and we can take those chances.
Oh, definitely, definitely. And I think, statistically on film, all of the above, really, we did really see Goff, just slide really after 2019, or excuse me, 2018 with the Super Bowl, and then just 2019 and then 2020. There were so many different statistics that really it's clear as day. You just see a steady decline in a lot of different categories. Sometimes statistics can be misleading, and sometimes you'll see maybe a handful of different things like play action or yards per attempt, things like that. And then maybe the other half of those statistics are you don't necessarily see that correlation where he's really sliding, but it's pretty consistent across the board. And I'm sure we'll get into it a little bit more, but it was tough. And there's nobody I really root against or anything. I'm really just trying to base things off, is he good at football, is he bad at football? Of course, all these guys are really good at football, but in terms of the context of the NFL, and I think we'll talk about it, where Goff definitely took steps back, and we didn't see him necessarily be a dynamic style of quarterback this last year.
Yeah, it was really disappointing because, being a Rams fan and watching, arguably the best regular season game of all time, Rams Chiefs 2018, going from that to, immediately I'm thinking, man, Todd Gurley got hurt early on in that game. So it was entirely Jared Goff and that defense, and guys had to step up, and there was no Cooper Kupp. So I was just really impressed with Goff's ability, his wherewithal to stay in that game and go toe to toe with Patrick Mahomes. And to then go from that and thinking you might have, a 10-year starter in Jared Goff, a franchise quarterback, that shining moment. And you're thinking this is a magical season. They're going to win the Super Bowl. And then all of a sudden, right off that bye, he was like never the same. I mean, we never saw a game like that again. And early on in that year, I wouldn't even say that's his best game. That may be the most exciting regular season game. That wasn't his best game. Earlier in the year on Thursday Night Football, he plays the Vikings. He goes toe to toe with Kirk Cousins, and he throws a perfect game, 158.3, passer rating, best you could have. I believe he had 5 touchdowns in that game. He was just unbelievable. One of the best performances I've ever seen. But then he goes from that to 2019, where they go 9-7, but they don't make the playoffs. And then this past year, I mean, they had to win at the end of the year to make sure they were in. And this wasn't a scenario I expected. I mean, at one point we're talking about the Rams potentially winning the NFC, and they were going toe to toe with the Saints, and things changed, and they they got on a little losing streak. But I think the glass shattered for me because I was very, critical of Jared Goff. I liked him, but I always felt like he was just, it wasn't that he was holding himself back, but I felt like he was kind of holding the offense back. Wasn't willing to make that next step. And I think the Miami game, the glass shattered for me when I realized he's not what he was in 2018. I don't know if he's going to be that, at least not for the Rams. And I felt immediately in that moment when you have a Tua Tagovailoa who's held under 100 yards and they win by 11, when a defense that just absolutely dominated them, Goff turns the ball over 4 times. At that moment, Alex, I was thinking, I want to see Wolford. I want to see mobility. And I'd like to see Jared Goff get his opportunity somewhere else. I'm not necessarily, hating on him, wishing him poorly, but I felt like his time in LA after that game was starting to come to an end. And I felt like with Sean McVay, he made so many adjustments when a guy like Vic Fangio and Bill Belichick really found what they were doing and kind of exposed what they were doing and created the blueprint and rather the map of how to beat this offense. I feel like Sean McVay was trying to go up here and Jared Goff was like getting about here, and they weren't meeting, at that highest peak. And so I felt like that is when the wheels came off, essentially.
Yeah, no, it's definitely it's a video I did as well on that 2018 Super Bowl, which was, and not for the Rams necessarily, but not so much for the Rams fans, but that was my favorite game plan of all time. What Belichick did to that offense
It was so good.
It was incredible, and I think they were the 4th highest scoring team in NFL history. The Rams were, and 3 points. We won't talk about it too much, but
No, you could talk about it. I'm over it.
yeah, but no, definitely we certainly saw elements of that game plan really carry on into the future years in 2019 and definitely 2020, and it really, you see where some players are transcend scheme, and then sometimes when that scheme is kind of ripped away from them, it kind of exposes the players for what they really are. And of course, it's important to say, the O-line deteriorated. I think it's really important, and something I was really thinking about while watching Goff today, when these quarterbacks sign these huge deals across the league, you see these rosters deteriorate around them. And with Goff, that really, it centers around the quarterback at that point. I don't think the team was built around Goff until he signed that contract because of all the money that goes into it. Then we see the O-line start to go away, the running back, a lot of these different weapons. They still have the receivers, but the team just lost some of the talent around him. And then once that slowly starts to strip away, then it's based on what Goff is able to do. And I think McVay realized or understood or came to grips with, we're building around our quarterback. If we're going to give him 35, 40 million, we need it to be a better guy, and we need to go get Stafford. And if we're going to base it around a quarterback, let's make it a guy who can change the game for sure.
Yeah, it's funny the way it worked out because I had Stafford pegged to go to the 49ers. I was thinking, I'm like, Kyle Shanahan's they're going to do it. John Lynch is going to do it. They're going to do it. And I was like, there's no way Jimmy Garoppolo is like, I don't think he's as good version of Jared Goff, to be honest with you. I mean, he wins more, so to speak, but I just never really like Jared Goff. One thing you can never knock is his toughness. And that's the thing is Goff was available. That's what kept him around. I mean, 2019, this team's always constantly being called the win now team. And we have to go out and get Aqib Talib and trade half our secondary and one the middle of a season team. But Jared Goff wasn't going away because he wasn't getting hurt. And it's not a shock that as soon as he got hurt, the Rams were able to move on because that money talks. I wasn't sure if they were going to be able to make that move if Goff didn't get hurt in week 16 against the Seattle Seahawks. And I'll be honest with you, if he didn't get hurt week 16, regardless of the fact, as unfair as this sounds, he played a good game in Lambeau and actually gave him an opportunity to win on the road in a very tough playoff environment. The sad thing is, him getting hurt opened the door, and it was forever opened, I thought, because it wasn't even anything Goff didn't do. It was what Wolford did. Having that mobility, having the ability to not only escape the pocket, but manipulate the pocket. And then just, it's that improvisational, trait that Wolford has that clearly Stafford has. And Goff doesn't really have that. It's like there are times where Goff can take off and run for a first. There are times where Goff will step up in the pocket, but it's just not a consistent thing with him, and honestly, I saw the parallels, after the 2018 season, it felt like Sam Bradford all over again when you saw the talent, and obviously Bradford could make any throw, but it was like, I don't know if it was the, just being shell shocked because Goff went through it in 2016 and then he went back to that kind of rough offensive line in 2019 that just was nothing like the Bill Ford tough offensive line of the year in 2018. I wonder, if that's really what did it. But yeah, I mean, I saw so many similarities to Sam Bradford, with the St. Louis Rams because, first overall picks. Bradford never had that taste of that victory and success. I mean, he had a losing record with the Rams. The best season they had, they went 7-9 his rookie year. They had a chance to beat Seattle against Charlie Whitehurst, and they
Jesus, my man,
Charlie Whitehurst, and they couldn't do it. So I just think they're pretty similar, and I felt like Goff was so far away from that, and then 2019, 2020 came, and I saw a lot of Sam Bradford.
Yeah, no, Jake, you make really good points, and I think one thing with Goff specifically is, especially nowadays, you want a quarterback who can create a second play, and generally speaking, the first play is what's schemed for the quarterback. You go through your progressions, you're sitting in the pocket. If things break down, you need a quarterback who can either move outside the pocket or be able to move inside of the pocket. And I really liked early on in Goff's career. I remember, honestly, in his first season, I remember against the Saints, they got blown out because the Rams were not quite what they were as they are today. But he showed some ability in the pocket, even going back to Cal, where he is able to move inside the pocket and buy time. And nowadays, you do need the guy who can break the pocket with speed. But I think even when watching Tom Brady, of course, he's a guy who can create a second play in the pocket because he can hang in there. He can slide. He can move a little bit if he needs to and turn a 2-second play into a 4-second play. And we just don't see that with Goff. And I think McVay slowly over time began to realize that more and more. And it's frustrating for coordinators. They want to not have to be right every single time. They don't want a guy who just gets what's there. They want somebody who's able to push the ball downfield or extend the play outside the pocket. And yeah, as you said, we'll see some bootleg keepers outside where Goff gains like 6 yards, but he's not dynamic with these legs. He's not the slowest guy, but he's not a kind of guy who's going to consistently create a second play and really hurt the defense. And, we see Woods or we see Cooper Kupp running around and trying to create that second play and being open as options later in the down 3, 4, 5 seconds. But Goff just isn't that type of guy. And I think that is a big reason why they went and got Stafford, which is really exciting.
It's really exciting, Alex, because, I did a deep dive on Stafford and I just, I've been watching him for years. I've been a huge fan of him for years. And since I live, on the East Coast, I get Lions games here and there, a lot more than Rams games without, actually having to go the extra mile to watch them. So, they would be on cable and eventually I got, the package or whatever. But I've been watching Stafford for a while and I can tell the people that have watched, they've tuned in on Thanksgiving and that was it, right? Like that's all they saw. Stafford can't do it. They choke at the end. Like I always said with Stafford, the turnover thing is such an overblown narrative that needs context, but context is never brought up when people bring up his turnovers. Because when you're down 24-0 in the fourth quarter and you're trying to make anything happen, yes, you're probably going to turn over the ball. When you're trying to win a game and you have to do literally anything possible and you only have 20 seconds left, yeah, you're probably going to turn over the ball because you're going for it all, right? You have to go the length of the field and you have to score a touchdown. It's not a field goal situation. But the thing that actually makes me laugh is when people say he can't win in the postseason and they blame it on him, like as in he has postseason struggles. And I would look at the stats and say maybe the second game wasn't the best against Dallas. They probably should have won that game. And in a sense, he might have blown that down the stretch. But the last game, the Seahawks game, you're playing in a hostile environment against Seattle. You're going up. Thomas Rawls had like 170 yards that game. They could not stop him. So the defense was an issue there. The other issue is that Zach Zenner was his starting running back in that game. I don't know how the hell you expect to win a playoff game with Zach Zenner like taking the carries. And on top of this, the play calling was horrendous. I mean, Stafford only threw the ball 30 times, what ended up being a blowout, and Zach Zenner ran the ball 11 times, and it was just the time possession was like 39 minutes Seattle. You're not going to win a football game that way. And then go back to his first playoff game against the Saints. Like they lost 45-28. He put up 4 touchdowns in his first ever playoff performance. And they're trying to say that like this guy can't play in the playoffs. Like he's like, this choke artist. And I don't subscribe to that notion. And on top of that, the reason I feel like this is the perfect fit for him, Sean McVay is 36, 37-0 when winning at halftime. That's not just like a shock. And when people say like, well, that's because Jared Goff, no, it's not. It's because Sean McVay manages the game well. And when they take a lead at halftime, they don't let it go. They're great when they have the lead. And so when you have Matthew Stafford, who's playing with a lead, he like never played with the lead when he was at the Lions. That's why he led the league in comebacks. It's why the year they went to the playoffs at 9-7, 8 of those 9 wins were fourth quarter comebacks. I mean, he's had to carry that team in a sense. And I do think he had early on in his career, Alex, I think this is a blessing and a curse. He had a Hall of Famer in Megatron, blessing, right? Because you could just throw it up to him. He would bail you out. But then I feel like he also got that kind of curse because people just expected, well, he had Megatron and, he's not that good. And then he started getting called Stat Padford, and I feel like that's kind of the origin of that and the fact that as great as Megatron is, you can't take away the talent Stafford has, and you can't take away the production he's had. I mean, it's pretty crazy to me the way some don't even view him as like a top 15 quarterback. And I've seen a lot of that this offseason. But this is by far, this was the best fit, I think, for him. You could argue the 49ers, maybe even the Colts, but I'd probably say the first two over the Colts.
Yeah, no, it's really difficult with football. I think football is the most challenging sport to really analyze because it is such a team game, and that's of course cliche, but I think especially with Stafford, it'll be so interesting that we get to see him on a team that doesn't necessarily surround him with either weapons or the defense or the coaching staff that can consistently or just in general get him to the playoffs. Whereas now we're going to an organization that's top 5, top 10, and has the supporting cast, has the defense, which pretty much carried this team into the playoffs last year, and the coaching staff who is willing to make sure the system is best fit towards him. And like I said, Kupp, Djax, Atwell. We got all these guys. Woods. Really sad to see what happened with Cam Akers. So I'm
Yeah.
really hoping Darrell Henderson steps up, or that was rough. But just exciting to see Stafford in a situation where he can finally excel, not just statistically. And it'll be a really interesting case study of what does it look like when a quarterback who's this developed in the league, who's been around for 10 years, goes from this type of team who doesn't have a lot of success historically to a very successful team in the last few years. It'll be fascinating to watch. It'll be incredible. And I have huge expectation for the Rams. I'm stoked about them.
I'm you and me both.
Sure you all are, man.
I've been dying to watch this offense since we found out Stafford was, and again, it's not really a knock on Goff. I mean, it's just we haven't seen a quarterback like Stafford since Kurt Warner. I mean, let's be real here. The Rams haven't had a quarterback that likes Stafford and what he brings to the table since Kurt Warner. You could make the argument Bulger had some good seasons, but he wasn't a transcendent, let's make everyone around me better. When I watch Matthew Stafford, and this is the funny thing, is like people were like, they're going to go out and get Julio Jones. They need to get Julio Jones. How did it go from they're going to they need to? They don't need to. They have a great, bunch of weapons, as you mentioned. And the thing that always kind of, made me confused about that logic is that, man, Stafford, you can go and watch the Titans game, 3rd and long, and he throws this seam buster deep to the 4th string tight end, Hunter Bryant. And like, that is what I'm talking about. He doesn't have to have anybody. He's if you're on the team, then you're getting a target. Like, there's who's going to be Stafford's favorite target? Should I get Kupp or should I get Woods? I'm like, I'll be honest with you. I would draft Woods over Kupp in a fantasy setting because of Woods' ability in the run game and how they use him in that way. But they're like neck and neck, and Stafford's not going to change anything because, like, what favorite target does Stafford have? He hasn't had one since Calvin Johnson. He may have leaned on Marvin Jones at times because Golden Tate was hurt, or vice versa. Maybe Kenny Golladay. But, like, I've never seen this guy have a favorite target since Calvin Johnson.
Yeah, and it's really a plethora of options now. And just to bring up another name, I'm really excited about Van Jefferson. I want to see if,
love him.
We've really seen McVay go towards the 12 personnel aspects of, 2 tight end sets and taking that 3rd receiver off. And I'm really interested to see with Djax and Atwell. I think Jefferson could push if they are going to go back to the 11 personnel with 3 receivers predominantly. I think they were at 97% in 2018, something like that, something crazy.
Yeah, it was nuts.
To go towards 12 and whatnot. So I'm interested to see if Jefferson can step up and be more of that deep threat. We don't really see that with Woods and Kupp. They dominate the intermediate, of course, and underneath. So I'll be interested to see if Jefferson can become that kind of Marvin Jones, Kenny Golladay style of player. Maybe not the jump ball type per se, but I'm excited with the weapons that they have with Stafford, and I think it's more than he needs, without a doubt.
I mean, I hear you. And, I'm interested in guys like Ben Skoranek in the long run, too. Like, they got him in the 7th round, really strong hands from Notre Dame. Look, the biggest thing with Sean McVay has been the red zone efficiency, and that dates back to Washington. I mean, I don't know what it is, but Sean McVay is not the play caller he is between, the 25 to the, say, the other 25-yard line. Once he gets in the red zone, he overthinks things. And I've noticed that. And it's like, just go with what is working. And you have a guy like Van Jefferson that has that controlled aggression. He's one of the best route runners I've seen coming out of college. Let that guy isolate him in one-on-one coverage, and he will win. And he showed that against Jamel Dean against the Buccaneers. Sliding in the end zone, scoring a huge touchdown in Tampa. And then in the playoffs, I don't remember who he was up against Green Bay, but he did the same thing. Like, allow him to do that. And then on the other side of the field, you can get creative. You now have Jacob Harris. I'm very curious to see what you think about him. You have Tyler Higbee. You have Cooper Kupp. All those guys have height. So maybe you throw an end zone fade to them, especially now that you have Stafford. You're really not limited in the red zone like you were with Jared Goff.
Definitely. And yeah, I'm really interested. I still want to go back. I really want to study what happened to Higbee in that 4-game sample where he had, 2,000 yards or something all out of nowhere, really.
It was
And
nuts.
I know it was kind of end of the year, so things were a little stranger for them. It wasn't necessarily the plan to say, you know what, it's Higbee time, baby. Let's just get him rocking. But that's always fascinated me. And I think it's really interesting I think a couple things are interesting. I think it's interesting to move off of Everett and especially the 12 personnel stuff we were just talking about. I still like Everett. I think he's a solid player, but maybe this moves Higbee. If they do go to that 11 personnel with just one tight end, maybe Higbee's featured even a little bit more. And while he might not be, in the upper echelon of these other tight ends like Kittle and whatnot, he has shown in that 4-game sample that he can play at an elite level. And if you feed him enough targets, he's going to produce like a mofo. So I want to see more out of Higbee, and I think it's interesting, especially with Stafford. As you said, maybe he will start to just go down the field a little bit more, and we aren't going to see this offense as underneath dominant as we've seen with Goff. And there was this really interesting article that Seth Galina just put out from PFF. It might have been a couple days ago, or maybe it was on a podcast or something, but I retweeted it so you can go to my Twitter account and find it. And it showed when you take away play action, it showed all the targeted routes are like 10 yards down the field for the Rams, or excuse me, all the routes that are run are way above average at this. It's 10 yards down the field and it's just this strip. So McVay is calling these plays right for this one specific area all the way across. And then it shows Goff's targets and it's the exact same red line. So essentially what that is saying is that Goff is he's not operating out of the system, which isn't always a bad thing. But when it's almost like you're a robot and you're not bringing anything more almost to the table, it's a shocking visual. And it's something I've never seen before where it's so consistent. And it does really show that Goff is just where the play is designed to go. That's where he's throwing, and he's not creating other aspects of offense inside the pocket, outside the pocket, throws down the field, things like that. It's very by the book, if you will. And I think that's where we're really going to see Stafford and the combination with McVay really start to blossom together.
Yeah, I mean, you said it best. It's by the book. And, like you said, it's not the worst to stick by, the system, but I mean, you play tough playoff games and sometimes you're going to have to play outside of that system. Sometimes you're going to have to improvise. And, that's what makes guys like Aaron Rodgers. And I mean, you said it, early on with Tom Brady and what he's able to do just using his eyes and just, changing everything around him while staying in the pocket. He's very manipulative. And then you have like a guy like Russell Wilson that is a whole different animal because, I mean, this guy will run all over the place. And which is why I think Gerald Everett's going to be in for a really good year, by the way, if he stays healthy. I mean, just look at the, Hollister, Will Dissly, Jimmy Graham. I mean, if you stay healthy, Russell Wilson can get you the football. But yeah, you have all sorts of guys like that. And the league better watch out because if Lamar Jackson, the common misconception I feel like with him is that it's like he can't throw inside the pocket, but I kind of disagree. I think the thing that would make him so dominant is if he could throw on the run with accuracy. His accuracy takes a nosedive as soon as he's on the run. Whereas, you had other guys like Michael Vick that love throwing on the run. And that, I think, is what's missing in his game. I do want to touch on that a little bit. What are your thoughts on him? Because, I mean, I think he's going to be like, if you're talking fantasy-wise, I think he's QB1. But I also think I list him as the third quarterback in general, not fantasy, going into this year. What are your thoughts on Lamar Jackson?
Yeah, no, I've been scooping him up in fantasy as well. And
there we go.
Yeah, I mean, league winner right there. But it's interesting because it actually kind of connects to the Jared Goff situation where, when you look at Lamar's 2019 season when he won the MVP, they used a lot of empty sets. And what that means is there's no running back in the backfield. There's no tight ends in the backfield. There's nobody. It's just the quarterback, and all 5 eligibles are out, just ready to go. And he dominated in 2019. I mean, he had historic production out of empty sets where you can really quickly read things, and then he also added the running ability out of empty where he can just take off and go. And why I say it's connected to Jared Goff is McVay slowly started stripping away different aspects of this offense, and he really started leaning on the play action game and empty sets. And you hear all about the play action game, but I don't think you hear as often about how much the Rams started using empty. And it started in 2018. It wasn't used quite as much in 17, but it's gone up substantially every year until this last year is 156 dropbacks out of empty. And Goff's yards per attempt and his average depth of target, how far the receiver is downfield when you target him on average, steadily declined in each of those categories, 18, 19 to 20. But the reason McVay started using it more is because it does spread out things for the quarterback and make things easier, more or less, where the defense can't disguise things necessarily. There are all 5 eligibles out in the route, so the quarterback is able to see a lot of different things. There's not just 2 or 3 routes with receivers running, and it spreads the defense in a way that you won't necessarily see in other types of formations. When the Rams consistently use that, and as they used it more and more, Goff got worse and worse. And I think it's really because it touches back on that chart I just mentioned where everything is in one specific area in terms of his target. He isn't comfortable getting off his first read and sitting in the pocket. And like I said, he won't create the second play. And so he isn't pushing the ball downfield. He also did that at one of the lowest rates in the NFL this last year. It was like 7% or something of passes 20 yards down the field. And when you're not pushing the ball downfield, especially in empty, it's pretty clear what you're doing. It's constantly quick game, which is just 3-step drops. You have quick game concepts. You don't get to 5-step. You don't get to 7-step. Things can't develop, and those receivers can't get down the field. And if Goff isn't getting, even if it is 3 steps, if he's not getting off his first read, it's much easier to key in on what they're doing and what Goff's trying to do. And I think it kind of hogtied McVay a little bit where it lessened it. There were aspects where it was McVay's fault too. I just want to say that.
Absolutely.
But it's very interesting. It's like the chicken and the egg. If he's realizing that Goff can do less, he has to call a less complex scheme. You can't trot out a full offense if Goff is declining or regressing in these different categories. So is that McVay's fault? Should he still be pushing, maybe more of his offense? It's hard to say. I'm not necessarily saying one way or the other.
Yeah, it's tough, right?
And it was obvious that Goff is declining. So that's anybody can see that in McVay. I can only imagine the conversations with
oh
boy
boy,
and all the guys every week, especially after that Dolphins game. Man, it's like, oh my god.
Oh,
but it's tough when you say, okay, you know what, Goff can't do that much. We need to go into empty more. We need to use play action, top 5 percentage in the league, and those 2 areas are constantly escalating. And Goff totally took a step back in both areas this last year in terms of yard per attempt and average depth of target in play action, in empty sets, and in other things as well. And so it really I think we're going to see McVay's offense just open back up. I think we're going to see. I think it's slowly beginning tighter and tighter these last few years, and I think it's going to open back up where even if you just look at empty sets as kind of a microcosm for everything the Rams are going to do or have done this last year, Stafford is more comfortable holding onto the ball longer. He's more comfortable taking hits. I think Goff, if you look at his under pressure statistics, they've constantly been one of the lowest in the league, and that was even during 2018 as well, which was maybe a foreshadowing of things to come, perhaps. But with Stafford, more of the offense just opens up. The receivers can get down the field at a higher rate. It'll stretch the defense more. The defense can't key on certain concepts and be ready to jump things. You could see they knew that Goff wasn't going to throw the ball downfield. And when there are fades outside or deep posts, things like that, when they're not going to throw that, you can match that one-on-one, and defenders were even keying on the underneath stuff while they were guarding those one-on-one fades or whatever. And it was pretty obvious on film that you can even design certain concepts around that where you can jump those underneath routes. And then all the brackets they could deploy in Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods. And it just, everything tightened up, and it almost happened not even just during the weeks of this 2020 season, but 2018, 2019, 2020, it was like a progression of things just tightening up, and it was something bad was going to happen, and it did.
Yeah, and I mean, it's really weird because if they win the Super Bowl, like what happens after that? I mean, Goff was gonna. I don't think Goff was not gonna regress because what he was doing, it wasn't just magically gonna get fixed because of the game winning, winning the Super Bowl. But I also find it really interesting because it's like, he did make that pretty incredible throw to Brandon Cooks, and Cooks. You could argue, he dropped it, but you could also argue there was, some contact there holding back his arm. And then the throw,
two throws like that.
yeah, and then the throw earlier in the game, when Patrick Chung, I think it was, saved the touchdown at the end. It might have been McCourty. But they were in quarters, and I think that was the biggest issue is like Cooks was just like, I'm open, like he's waving his hand, and Goff just wasn't reading the coverage well. And I think, a guy that's come on our show before, my other podcast, I just think like he really broke it down. Dan Orlovsky, the quarters caught like that one play that they called on that particular one, and he was showing from Goff's perspective and how he can't see because he's not moving, so he can't. It looks like there's nobody open, but if he moves, like maybe turns this way or moves this way, he would have been able to see Cooks wide open down the seam, and he would have been on time with that throw. Instead, he's late, and it allows the Patriot, I think it was Chung, to get in there and knock the pass down. It was the back of the end zone play where, Cooks could have caught it, but I just don't think there was enough time to even get your feet in bounds at that point. Like it was just thrown way too late. You know what play I'm talking about?
Of course, and it goes back to that heat graph.
Where
Goff he's gonna execute the play, and Cooks wasn't open right away, but he did come wide the heck open, and Goff, he can't operate outside of necessarily his reads, or he can't go even just a little bit off script, at least this last year, where Cooks wasn't open right away. But if you're not almost robotic in the way you're reading the play, he could have hit Cooks a little bit quicker. And there was a good amount of time much before that he threw it, where Cooks, he could have gotten that throw off. And those are the kind of plays. It goes back to Jimmy Garoppolo as well. He had a lot of struggles, and I think in the Super Bowl, and I think him and Goff, I have a really interesting parallel in their career.
Yeah, I was saying that.
They have this ascension where they both were Super Bowl teams, of course, NFC West. And then we see when the scheme kind of gets stripped away even a tiny bit, we don't see these guys perform at the same level. And that throw at the end of the Super Bowl with Jimmy against the Chiefs was a difficult throw, but that's the difference. I always laugh when people say, oh, well, if he just hit this one throw, it's like, yeah, that's the throw. He needed to hit the throw to win, and he didn't make it. So, and almost the same with Goff. That was the play. And so it can just come down. Sometimes in football, these things that you struggle with get magnified in those big moments. And the thing that you struggle with, it comes down to that one big play, whether it be in the playoffs or the Super Bowl or anything, and you don't make it.
Yeah,
and that's why we see why.
Yeah, I mean that's like the biggest test. I mean, the Super Bowl's evil, man. You lose, and yeah, it's built for the winner to win, go in the history books, and the loser to die and try to figure out what's going to go on with their. I mean, the Rams, they dealt with that, the greatest show on turf, when they lost to the Patriots. They were not the same, and I've talked to players that were part of that organization. Had Tommy Pauly on the podcast, and he said a big issue with them is when they lost, they let London Fletcher go, and everybody, they felt like their core leader had just, disappeared from the locker room. And, all of a sudden you start over analyzing, like the Rams actually kind of ran into that, in my opinion. They didn't really stick by their guns. I know they went out and got Jalen, and I love Jalen Ramsey. He's the best corner in the league, in my opinion. But didn't it seem like it was like a last ditch effort? They let the kind of Super Bowl hangover get to them. Keep in mind, they started off 3-0 in 2019. And then they, didn't do very well. Well, they went 9-7. I don't want to say didn't do very well, but it just felt that whole year like the trading away of Talib and Peters during the season, it felt like they were trying to, like cling on to something, even though maybe if they stuck by their guns, that team wasn't as bad as they kind of thought. They weren't as, not prepared. I don't really know. It felt like a weird season. I do feel like, the offensive line struggled and, they let Roger Saffold go. And we all kind of had a feeling that was going to be a huge loss. But I think furthermore, you had your center retire and John Sullivan. And on top of that, I think Jared Goff hurt the offensive line because, we've been talking about throughout this show, there are times where like you need to move around. You need to create, like, the offensive line can't protect you forever. And when you're not making those, those reads and you're not like it never felt like there was like a sense of urgency with him. And so I think 2019, I don't want to put it all on Jared Goff, but I think the offensive line struggled, but I think the offensive line, I don't know how much different the offensive line in 2019 was, with the offensive line in 2020. I feel like maybe, 2020 was a little bit better, but 2019, I didn't feel like was the worst in the league the way sometimes Jared Goff made it look.
No, Jake, I love that you brought that up. And yeah, as we referenced, he sits in his spot. Like, you don't necessarily think of him as a guy who's just a stone in the pocket, but
Yeah.
now he is. Looking at his 2020 film, he just goes in his spot and he's not creating more time at all. And it requires the offensive line to be perfect, where you have to block perfectly. And if you mess up even a little bit, this is where Jared Goff's going to be. He's not going to help your tackles out, your guards out. He's going to sit in that spot. He's not going to move around the pocket. And it requires them to be really good every single snap. And McVay, one of the things that McVay's scheme helps out with is when you're using play action, you're constantly moving that spot. So it does help out the offensive line because they don't just have to, pass block and just go right back 30 or 40 times or however many times a game. But when you're using the drop back and you're just sitting in that spot, it makes it a lot easier for the defensive linemen because they know if they beat their guy, they know exactly where you're going to be. And that goes back to Stafford. He is able to move in the pocket. He's maybe a little faster than Goff. I don't know what their 40 time is. I don't know, they're getting in underwear and we'll see if they have 4.6, 4.7 or whatever it is at the combine, but
Yeah.
he's able to move in the pocket and that's so crucial. And one thing I want to add about what happened with Jared Goff is with the offensive line in 2017 and 2018, his average time to throw or average time to pressure was about 2.85. And that's above average in terms of it's a longer amount of time than the average NFL quarterback has. But in 19 and 20, it started to slip to 2.6-ish. And that's right around average. But, it doesn't sound like that time, that difference would make that much of a change. But that is huge. That is huge, especially for a guy who can get a little bit flustered by pressure. If he's starting to get hit a couple times early in the game, he's a different story. And we definitely saw that in these last 2 years. And when the offensive line loses just a little bit and you're asking them to be perfect every single play, those things add up. And we see more fumbles. We see more interceptions. We don't see the efficiency. That's such a big thing in this offense too, because, well, whenever you watch a Rams game or 49ers game or the guys in this system, you see players wide open 3 or 4 times a game. Like that's just
Absolutely.
That's going to happen. And we saw the Rams take a significant step back in terms of their explosive plays, both running and passing. And when you're not getting those explosives, then that's going to condense everything inside. And Goff lost some of his efficiency. And that is key. If these guys are open, whether it be the guys wide open downfield or constantly spreading the field in a way that's conducive to efficient quarterback play, if you're not hitting these plays and you're not getting explosive passes or explosive runs, it's going to make things really, really difficult. And I think that's a key part of why the Rams struggled so much in 2020.
No, I absolutely agree with you. And well, it's funny because with Goff, it was constantly like I heard from fans that were trying to back him. And I understand, this guy led you to a Super Bowl. You're gonna want to not believe that he is regressing, right? It was this denial. I never actually went through that. I kind of always suspected he was kind of going downhill. It was hard to believe, but I did somewhat believe it. Maybe that's just the pessimist in me, even though I'm actually like considered Mr. Optimist when it comes to the Rams. But it just, when I saw constant like people saying, yeah, the issue is because I was showing the time to throw, and I would get comments on Twitter like, yeah, but Jake, you're not taking into context what that means. And I'm like, what are you saying here? And they're like, well, that just means that no one can get open. Goff can't hit him. I'm like, that is absolutely not what it means. If Robert Woods is open 40 yards downfield, it's going to be a close, it's a close call, but an NFL quarterback should hit that throw, a deep 40-yard post or whatever. Goff is not throwing that. Goff is throwing to Cooper Kupp, who's sitting there for an 8-yard gain because that is what Goff is comfortable with. He doesn't want these close shaves, And then I don't even know what happened the Seattle game. It was week 16 when they went to Seattle. They should have won that game. And I don't know if you know the throw I'm talking about, but they're driving down the field. I think they're winning at this point in the game. And Goff throws the worst pass I've ever seen. Robert Woods is running. Goff is running right. He rolls right, and then he just kind of lofts it up, like right into Quandre Diggs' hands. And I still don't know what he was doing with that play. Do you know what I'm talking about on that one?
I don't quite remember, but it kind of blends together with a lot of throws, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I know I'm pissing off a lot of people right now. Not because they hate that we're talking about it, but because that throw brings back horrible memories. And that throw, think about this. That throw basically gave Seattle the division. I mean, the Rams should have won the NFC West last year. And then they proved it by beating them in their home in the playoffs. Man, I gotta say though, that was so annoying. I felt good about Goff going in. That was really cool that he was able to do that and win that game. But I really felt for Wolford. I wanted to see him get an opportunity to start against Seattle. I thought he started off well, looked somewhat comfortable, but it was so quick, right? They're moving the ball, and then he has a weird read option where he keeps it. And I mean, it was weird because they threw the flag, Jamal Adams hit him, and then they picked it up, and then he was gone. He was going to the hospital. I'm like, what just happened? At that point, I did not think Jared Goff was going to win that game. I'll be honest with you.
Yeah, no. And I think when we saw McVay start Wofford, I don't even know how to say his name, but
he doesn't know how to say his name either.
yeah, the accountant man, or whatever he did. But I think it's similar to what we've been saying, where McVay wanted just something extra, just even a little bit different. I think if you compared Goff and Wolford, McVay, I think it's still McVay would side with Goff, but I think he wanted to just add something extra that Goff wasn't providing. And just throughout the year, whether it be the broken thumb or just in general, he wasn't providing that extra little bit of ability to change what the defense is expecting and give even a slightly different look, or just extend the play, or just provide another outlet of offense. We just didn't see that from Goff. And I think it kind of foreshadowed McVay making the move that he did, where it was time. We aren't getting better as an offense. The defense really carried us the whole season, which you wouldn't think with McVay. You wouldn't think that would happen, but here we are, and it was time to make this move. It was time.
That had to be like gut wrenching too for McVay. Like, I'm not gonna say this guy's an egomaniac, but this guy's like considered the golden boy. He comes to the Rams, second year they go to the Super Bowl. They have the number one offense, and then all of a sudden their offense is like anemic, and it's like, and he's hearing it, and it had to be tough. And I think, I think it got a little overblown when people said he took the Rams job because he had Goff. I think there's some truth to having a quarterback, but I don't think he necessarily wanted Goff. And I'd make the argument, if he told you straight up right now, like if you had to look at his board, he probably had a guy like Wentz or maybe even Prescott ahead of Goff because of what they add to an offense, just based on what it sounds like he wants in a quarterback. I wouldn't be surprised if, you redid that draft and you gave Washington the number one pick and he had to choose his quarterback and, they got rid of Cousins. I wouldn't be shocked if he picked Wentz or Dak. I really wouldn't.
Yeah, and it's interesting what he was able to do with Kirk as well. Kirk isn't necessarily that type of quarterback who has the running ability of Wentz or Prescott, but he isn't going to be a by the book guy in the same way that Goff was. I think that sometimes is a criticism with Kirk, but there are elements of his game where he is more developed and refined, where we've seen McVay's system work with him for a long time in Washington, and Kirk is still putting up incredible numbers as well.
Oh
I
yeah,
challenge anybody to go look at what
it's
he's
crazy.
doing. And of course, with just how good quarterback is these days, there does have to be guys who aren't the elite guys, but also like aren't bad whatsoever. And I think Kirk's right in that middle area. So I think even a player like him, and he's proven it, that a lot of different styles of quarterback, not even just the running type guys, but the guys who are able to sit in the pocket and create in the pocket. Those are the kind of guys that McVay wants in terms of Stafford. And it would be interesting. I think we're going to see with Shanahan and Trey Lance, where now we do have more of a running style quarterback. And I think both McVay and Shanahan would value that. But it'll be really interesting to see what Shanahan does to kind of counter this McVay offense with Stafford. And I think that was kind of a direct, we're going to go get our guy because you just got our guy and your guy, because I think they want Stafford too. But it'll be interesting to see what a running style quarterback looks like in this system in terms of Shanahan, and then kind of an elite style arm talent, what McVay can do with that for sure.
I totally agree with you, and it's funny because everyone knows on this. I don't know if you know, but Trey Lance was my number one quarterback in this draft. I absolutely loved him. I'm super high on him, and I know it's like, wait, you have a guy ahead of Trevor Lawrence? I actually have two because I love Fields as well. I still had a really high grade on Lawrence, but Lance to me has one of the best deep balls I've seen coming out of college, and I think there's a lot of false narratives out there that this guy, because he came from the FCS. I mean, I thought we already got over this with Wentz, but apparently not. And just even, talk about Steve McNair out of Alcorn State. I mean, this has happened throughout history. I don't know why we're still hung up on level of competition, but we are. Trey Lance called his own plays. Trey Lance, made his own protection adjustments at the line of scrimmage. I mean, he did everything himself. He wasn't a clapper. He didn't look over at the sideline. Like, okay, that's what we're doing. No, like if you watch, like there's a reason why they're called the Alabama of the FCS. Like they're a really tight knit program. Easton Stick didn't end up being quite a Wentz or what Lance was, but I still think they get some really good contribution out of these guys. And so when I was watching Lance, I'm like, this guy can throw 65 yards, 70 yards, pinpoint accurate, by the way. And then on top of it, I mean, I just talked to Andre Weingarten, who's one of the ratings guys for Madden, and he flat out told me they have an 87 speed rating for him. Like this guy's, I mean, he's really fast, and not only that, the way he's built, like he's not built exactly like Wentz, but he can take a hit. So I think it's going to add a whole other dynamic. And then you go out and you get Trey Sermon, who I absolutely loved in the draft. I loved all the trades apparently. But, Sermon and him are going to be a nice tandem. And then you have guys, even at the very worst. And by the way, this is why I think Trey Lance starts week 1, as crazy as that sounds for some people, because he's going to get a preseason that none of the rookies got last year. So I think that's something to keep in mind. But when you have a guy like, you have Sermon, you have Mostert, they got Elijah Mitchell, they got Gallman. They have a really nice running back group. They have an offensive line that's slightly underrated. I mean, Brunskill actually held his own against Donald last year. No one wants to talk about that. But then on top of that, I mean, trust me, I'm a Rams fan. I'm giving a 49er some credit here. And then on top of that, you have the best tight end in the league. Hate on me all you want, George Kittle. I have a tick ahead of Kelsey. I think he's a better blocker. Yeah, I'll just say that. But anyway, you have Kittle. You have two guys that can absolutely dominate yards after the catch in Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk, who are essentially running backs when they have the ball in their hands. And then you have Jalen Hurd, who I'm really excited about. If he can stay healthy, he's going to have a good season. That's a lot of weapons for a rookie in Trey Lance. And then you have Kyle Shanahan. So, like, we're talking about all these weapons, but who do you have as your play caller? You have Kyle Shanahan. I think he's in a really good spot. And to be honest with you, like I told Rams fans straight up, I'm not going to just change my opinion because this guy went to the Niners. He's the real deal. and he went to a great situation. And Alex, I'll further add this. I thought they were going to get Stafford. I actually wanted the Rams to somehow trade up and get Wentz, or not Wentz, Lance, when we were talking early in the draft, because the way like the mainstream media was making it sound is that this guy was going to fall. And I was honestly stupidly starting to buy into that. Even though I had him as my number one quarterback, my hope is that he didn't play last year. I mean, he played like one showcase game, which he threw the only interception he threw in college. But like I felt like that might be enough to maybe slide him where Fields went. And if that was the case, I felt like maybe the Rams could try to, I don't know, Hail Mary trade Jared Goff and somehow end up, it was probably like a crazy situation, but that's mainly who I wanted. And then seeing the Niners get him, that was such a gut punch. But hey, they got Stafford, so I can't fret too much, but that guy's he's gonna be dominating the NFC West for the next 10 years at the very least.
Well, Jake, I have to push back on Trey Lance a little bit.
Do it, man.
He was my 5th overall quarterback.
Really?
Pre-draft.
Okay.
And I felt comfortable with whoever Shanahan was going to take because just the system in general, I really, it's as we've talked about on the show, it's the most quarterback conducive. Players are often wide open, especially with Lance's athleticism. I mean, he's going to be successful. I don't doubt that. But pre-draft, really diving into his tape, I mean, first of all, he's thrown the least passes of any quarterback who's been drafted in the first round. So when we, that's not a terrible thing. It's not ideal for sure. But when I went to the film and really dove into it, you do see those things pop up where there's not a lot of polish. I think mentally he does have there are those aspects that you talk about where he is calling the plays. I think he called his own protection. And then I think on the backside of plays, he would call his own concept at the line, which is really impressive. And that's not something you see in college really at all, especially nowadays. They have those, stupid cards.
The clappers.
With Kirby on it and whatever.
Yeah.
But with this style of offense, you do want that efficiency because you're not always going to be taking those big shot plays. It's going to be the play action rollouts, the keepers, and being able to consistently hit those and keep things going downfield. So then later the big play action shots can get open and it's really predicated on your ability to consistently operate. And I think that's where we saw, especially with Jimmy Garoppolo, when he did have that success, he can consistently really hit those quick 3-step concepts, at least in the Super Bowl run, where that's where he was having some of his better starts or better play, if you will. But Lance misses a lot of those layups. And when you look at his film, a lot of the time it's on these play action keepers where he's rolling outside. There's a guy in the flat and he just straight dirts the ball. And there are some other aspects. There's some technique issues. I broke him down. I had Kurt Warner on and he really talked about, he kind of opened my eyes to some things that I wasn't even seeing, where Lance isn't always looking at where he's going to throw. So let's say he starts looking to the left. And then if this guy comes open to the right, his footwork isn't necessarily getting there when his eyes are. And then that leads to some of the inaccuracy. So I do think he's a very accurate quarterback. And I think all the arm strength ability that you talked about is 100% there. No doubt about it. And the type of athlete we're getting at that pick is incredible as well. But I think the accuracy in terms of, never throwing an interception, at least in that year, the showcase, whatever, that was stupid.
That was so dumb.
There are a lot of balls that should have been intercepted just going through his film. And so I think the never thrown interception, 0 interception thing, that's a little overblown. And I do want to see Jimmy start. I think Trey needs to sit in this offense. We've definitely seen different quarterbacks kind of struggle in the first year and they get much better in the second year. I think Trey needs some time. And we don't know what this COVID year off, where I think he had a year off. The one game, the one game.
Let's just throw the one game in the trash. It means nothing.
Yeah. It was silly. I didn't even watch it. I was like,
I don't even think Lance wanted to be there, to be honest. It's like, come on.
Yeah,
now.
Man, I'll throw my first pick, whatever. It's But I think we haven't seen the effects of what this COVID year off for the guys who didn't play last year. And I think that's even interesting with Penei Sewell, where he's incredible, but he didn't play this last year. How much of a difference is that going to make? I always have a thing. If a guy misses a year, whether it's not for injury, but when I was looking at the Antonio Browns, the Le'Veon Bells, the guys who kind of have a weird situation, they just don't play. In terms of fantasy, more so, I'm very skittish on investing in those types of players because football, A, you need to get hit consistently and be in football shape. And B, if you're away from the game that long, who knows what type of training you're getting? You're not getting the reps, of course. So I think with Lance, I do want to see him sit a little bit, get comfortable with the playbook and master it, and then he can kind of go and play free where he's not thinking so much mentally and let those physical tools take over.
I mean, hey, those are great points. I mean, I actually haven't really heard any of that before. So this is good. I always because I've gotten a lot of pushback on Lance, and I think one of the things was Jimmy G. I think is 22-8. So I mean, he's a winner. Like he does win with that team, and he doesn't need to do a whole lot. Now I feel like they got him because he's like, now you're talking, Russell Wilson, Kyler Murray in that division. He makes it a little tougher. Jimmy Garoppolo, teams know his tendencies. Teams know what you're getting with Garoppolo. But when you go up against Trey Lance, I don't think any of us are going to know until we watch that happen. And I think the reason I have it, like right now, I would start Jimmy Garoppolo because Trey Lance hasn't played in the preseason. But I guess my feeling is that he's going to have like a Russell Wilson type of preseason, his rookie year, when they had Matt Flynn like pegged and they paid him and he was 100% going to start. And then Russell Wilson came out as a 3rd round pick and just torched the preseason and put himself as the starter week 1. And we never heard of Matt Flynn again. But I mean,
he's feeling, man. He's got like $1,000 million somewhere. Just
yeah.
I guess he's still in the league, but he's gotten paid. He's not too angry about it.
I mean, hey, you can go back and you can watch that the Packers Week 17 game. He threw like 6 touchdowns, and I've never seen a player get paid off of one game.
God, that's the guy.
That's the guy. It's funny, but you mentioned, I mean, you didn't get too far into it, but you mentioned not talking about injury. Well, I do want to, because Cam Akers suffered the torn Achilles, and I'm not trying to talk too much about Cam Akers because I've really hit on that a lot, and I think people want to stop crying about it right now. So what I'll say is that there's a running back by the name of Marlon Mack who's coming back from that injury. How do you think, where do you think his role is with the Colts? Because I've heard a lot of, they like him as a person, they like him as a player, but there's a chance, Marlon Mack might be done in the NFL, and he might just be playing his last NFL contract. With that Achilles, that really puts him in a rough spot. But where are you on Marlon Mack, and do you think he can get back to where he was?
Yeah, I mean, the Achilles injury is absolutely brutal, and not just in football, but I guess more so in football. I think, isn't that what KD had? I think he had the Achilles, and
yeah,
he's been looking pretty darn good. But especially in football, especially at the running back position, somebody put up a list on Twitter in the last few days of all the running backs in the last 10 years or so who have torn their Achilles, and it's barren. And I don't mean to further upset the Akers fans, as you said, but it is brutal. It is really tough. And there's not really one guy you could say, well, at least blank did this. It's not great. So in terms of Marlon Mack, I don't even know how much of a role they were really projecting even last year because of going to get Jonathan Taylor in the 2nd round where they did. They're really, really high on him. So in terms of Mack, I guess he could spell him a little bit. They also have Nyheim Hines, who had a really big year, especially for fantasy people. I think he had 110 targets, something like that.
Crazy.
So it'll be tough for Mack. If Taylor and Hines stay healthy, I think he's just a backup, honestly.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate because I think he was finding his stride before Taylor came into the picture, before he got hurt. And, they drafted Hines and they drafted Jordan Wilkins. And to see him kind of emerge was interesting. I always kind of viewed Hines as a guy who's going to come in the league and he's instantly going to be a pass catching threat. And I mean, it wasn't instant, but now here he is. And, fantasy wise, he's one of the best, James White type of running backs you could have, Now, in regards to, because we mentioned Cam Akers, what are your thoughts on Daryl Henderson? Because I'm very high on him. I think fantasy wise, he can be a top 12 running back. I have him as a top 12 running back this year, but I think his ceiling is top 6 because I think what isn't explained enough when you talk about these guys is that we've touched on Jared Goff's poor performance last year and his regression, but we really didn't discuss the running backs still were like top 10 in the league. I mean, that running game was still working. And that's saying a lot considering that everybody and their mother knew that they were going to run the football because it was like they weren't scared of Jared Goff. It was like they were daring him to run the football. And, there were 8, 9 guys in the box. I don't think you get that type of look this year because of Stafford.
Yeah, I don't know if I can quite meet you on the top 6, top 12.
It's lofty. It is lofty.
It is lofty. And maybe you're going to win your league and I'm going to be looking like the chump over here. But we saw Henderson kind of take over that role when Akers wasn't playing as much. And I don't know if he's the kind of guy who you want to give the bulk of the touches to, or not even the bulk, but all more or less where he is getting that necessary volume. Really in fantasy, what's really important is opportunity. And you see a lot of the guys who have the highest opportunity. It's like the top 12 guys with the most opportunity finish, like 11 of them finish in the top 12. So it's really about your touches, your targets, and your running back carries. And I don't know if Henderson's if he is going to get the touches of an RB1, I don't know if he can sustain the whole year, especially even now we're adding a freaking 17th game. I don't even know about that. But McVay has also talked about how he wants that stable of running backs where I don't know, maybe I do think that he was with Akers going to kind of make him that RB1. And I loved Akers. I was drafting him and I took him even a couple days before the unfortunate injury. But I think I just don't see Henderson getting that kind of opportunity. I think it'll be more of a committee, if you will.
Yeah, I think it's tough because it's really actually weird. They're in a weird situation now. It's reminiscent to 2018 when not Jared Goff, Todd Gurley goes down and they're like, all right, John Kelly, we drafted you in the 6th round. You've been wanting your chance. Here's your chance. And he didn't do anything. And then the UDFA out of USC, Justin Davis didn't really do anything. So they signed CJ Anderson right off the couch. I really don't see how this ends without getting a veteran. Like at least at the end of training camp and preseason, I've been saying it to people because everyone's like, are they going to sign Todd Gurley? Are they going to sign this guy? Are they going to sign this guy? Maybe, but not right now because this is the golden opportunity. It's a bad way to put it because, obviously you don't want Cam Akers to be hurt if you're Sean McVay, but it does give him an opportunity to see a guy like Jake Funk, who he drafted in the 7th round, maybe see a little what he can do, with increased workload. And then definitely Daryl Henderson, definitely Xavier Jones. I mean, this is the guy I had a 5th round grade on. I think the unprecedented off season and pre-draft process last year due to COVID, not being able to go to the combine, things like that, really hurt him. And so he went undrafted. They love him. So he's the next man up after Henderson. So I'm curious, now these guys get an opportunity. Raymond Calais, 7th round pick by Tampa. They try to sneak him on the practice squad. The Rams do their usual. They love picking those guys up right before they go on the practice squad. And then Otis Anderson, who has some upside there as a return man, as somebody that offers the ability in the passing game. I think he offers a little bit more than Jake Funk. And I know I'm going to get a lot of hate for that because he's like a fan favorite right now. But when you make that argument, at least understand where I'm coming from, Alex, where I say they likely will go and sign a veteran, but why would they sign one right now when you have the training camp and then you have preseason? Why take reps away from these young guys and then, wait until you evaluate them plus injury? Does Todd Gurley really want to go into a training camp right now and risk injury? I mean, he's never getting a contract again if he goes into a training camp and tears his ACL or something. So I feel like a guy like Todd Gurley, Adrian Peterson, Alfred Morris, all those guys, they're waiting until the end of training camp, waiting until the end of preseason. And I think that's when you evaluate the roster as a whole. And I think there's a chance the Rams could sign a guy like Peterson or Gurley. I don't necessarily think it'll be Gurley because I just think there's so much animosity there How that ended. It's weird because Eric Dickerson kind of gives me some hope by saying, it's a no-brainer. So that makes me wonder because, Todd Gurley and Eric are friends, and he's obviously with the Rams
Just move that
organization.
Dickerson, man. How's that?
But
Throw him in that minimum.
yeah, I mean, you have two SMU guys because
There you
Xavier
go.
Jones is also from SMU. But no, I think if all signs point to, in my opinion, to either Adrian Peterson, who has familiarity with Matthew Stafford, who is somebody that had over 600 yards last year, who was in a committee, um, and Alfred Morris. And Alfred Morris has familiarity with Sean McVay. He had kind of this resurgence of his career. I'm not saying he went back to the old Alfred Morris, but all of a sudden this guy's relevant again in a sense that he could even get a job. And Morris is interesting because he's a pretty good pass protector. And again, back to the familiarity with Sean McVay. So I guess, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think they go veteran, or do you think they're going to roll with the guys they have?
No, I think they will pick up somebody. I think you do need somebody to spell. There's a lot of touches that are up for grabs, and I just don't think Henderson and this stable that you're mentioning are able to really fulfill and take on that type of workload because McVay is going to want to run the ball a lot, and I definitely think they'll need to bring somebody in, no doubt about it. So I agree. I don't think it's going to be Gurley with that type of animosity that we saw. It's just not going to
I
happen.
love it. I love it, man.
Not
I'm
gonna
not even
happen.
gonna lie.
Yeah,
If they
just
won
not
a
gonna
Super Bowl with Gurley, I'd be so happy.
Yeah, no, and he deserves it. And speaking of fantasy, you go back and look at his
Ugh.
couple year run there, and it was absolutely incredible. Just makes me miss watching him, honestly. But there will need to be somebody picked up. Peterson, Alfred Morris, maybe one of these guys, maybe a trade or something. But I don't think, man, the Akers thing just it devastates me, man. It's still fresh and prayers up to him and stuff. But I think somebody else will need to be brought in. I think I just don't see Henderson as being kind of the lead dog and taking 200, 300 touches, something like that. I don't see it happening.
I think he could get 225, maybe 250. But I do think you're onto something there because Sean McVay today in his presser basically said they love Hendo. They think he's a go-to guy, but they also realize they have to keep him healthy. And they can't give him a giant workload. So they're going to have to rely on guys like Xavier Jones that they don't go out and get a. And by the way, I think Xavier Jones, this is a league that has a bunch of really talented running backs that, I think a lot of these guys can succeed. I mean, go back to Elijah Mitchell and what Elijah McGuire, sorry. Elijah Mitchell's the rookie. Elijah McGuire from Louisiana Lafayette, he comes in for the Jets. He looks pretty good. Ty Johnson last year, an outcast, 5th-round pick from Maryland by the Lions. They just cut him out of the blue. He goes to the Jets. He makes something out of himself. And then, I mean, let's talk about Kalen Ballage last year, gets cut from the Jets of all places, and then goes to the Chargers and actually turned in a decent run there. I mean, they didn't bring him back, and he was honestly looking like a really enticing fantasy option going to the Steelers and maybe getting the bulk of those carries. And then Najee Harris comes in and totally ruins that. But I just think it's a league full of opportunity if a next man up. And I think there's a lot of running backs that still have it. I mean, I was really done with Devontae Booker, and he had a solid year last year and ended up getting a nice contract to be the handcuff to Saquon Barkley, which doesn't look that bad right now since he's on the PUP list. And I just feel like there's a lot of guys around that league right now and a lot of good running backs. So I wouldn't be surprised if somebody like Xavier Jones emerged, not as the go-to guy, but ended up having a pretty good season as the backup.
Yeah, no, it'll be interesting to see what they do. And I think you raise a really good point about just keeping Henderson healthy. I think even just bringing somebody in for depth who maybe they aren't going to give him that many touches at the beginning of the year, but we're talking about how they might need, or they likely need another guy right now. Imagine if they do overwork Henderson and he does get injured, then what do you do? I mean,
then you might have to, well, it depends. Where are we in the season, Alex?
Well,
is the trade deadline passed?
And I think it's interesting to note too that Henderson was a second rounder, as was Akers. So they really like Henderson. I don't doubt that at all. They, as much as they liked Akers, they spent around the same capital same capital in terms of the two, and I think it was a little higher for Akers if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
But
and they traded up to get him too.
and they
With the
traded up to get him
Patriots.
exactly. So they like this guy, and he will get a solid amount of work. But as you said, what do we do if he gets injured or we don't have some depth? It's a little dicey right now with the Akers injury.
It's a win now. I mean, it's really a win now situation. It always really has been. We always talk about, but now more than ever, because you go out and you get Stafford, you have him for 2 years, maybe more, but we don't know if Stafford's the type of guy who gets a Super Bowl and he's like, all right, I want to go be a dad. Like, you know what I mean? Like, just, I wouldn't be surprised. I don't really know where he's going to go in that regard. But I do think that you want to make the most out of those 2 years at the very least. And if somebody like Henderson were to go down, unless Xavier Jones or somebody like that emerges, if it's before the trade deadline, I think that they would try to get a Kareem Hunt, maybe even Jamal Williams with the Lions. That was a weird fit for me. I feel like Jamal Williams is a guy that can tote the rock and be a go-to back, and seeing him kind of be in that timeshare with, I mean, they also added another running back that I really liked in Jamar Jefferson, but you have, Swift, Jefferson, Williams. It's kind of weird. I mean, it's not as weird as Green Bay because I mean, they have a timeshare. But I definitely think, those guys would be, available, or at least they would try, and, maybe even the Raiders are going nowhere. They have, Jacobs and they have Kenyon Drake. Maybe they're an option. Maybe you go with familiarity's sake and you call up Miami and say, hey, Gaskin's pretty good. Ahmad's pretty good. Dokes looks good. You want to give us some Malcolm Brown back? I mean, he has familiarity with their offense, I honestly, at that point, it would really raise a red flag if Henderson goes down. I think that was the biggest issue with Akers, is that I didn't feel like Henderson wasn't capable of taking those carries and doing something with them. He was the most efficient back last year out of all of them. And he broke the most tackles and forced the most missed tackles. But the thing is, with Cam Akers gone, their increased depth and having all this this luxury depth, because at the time it seemed like Akers was a luxury pick. Now all of a sudden it's like they're one injury away from having a bunch of running backs, a bevy of running backs that have never played an NFL snap before. And that is a concern moving forward.
Yeah. And historically, we see so often with this offense where there are a lot of different styles of players and running backs, or just different names who aren't necessarily established in the league do really, really well. Going back to Mike Shanahan, of course, it's well documented. So there could be a guy, and even with a fantasy lens, it would be interesting to invest in a player who doesn't necessarily have a big name that they bring, whether it be trade or whether one of these free agents. These are the kind of situations, these kind of nebulous backfields where we do know that Henderson is the guy, but I suppose before the Akers injury, his ADP was not as high as it is now. But when these backfields are kind of up in the air a little bit, that's where there can be some major fantasy production, especially if Henderson goes down. And then if you're getting Adrian Peterson or somebody like that in 15th round, something like that, that's where you could get a lot of production from not that high of an investment.
I mean, I'm seeing Xavier Jones go off the board at the end of these redrafts, so I'm like, all right, these people they're watching closely. That would be my bet. If Henderson goes down, I think Jones, given the carries, I think could go over 1,000 yards, because I don't think people realize 1,000 yards in a 17-game season really isn't that much anymore. It kind of really everything with a 17-game season, it kind of dumbs down stats in general. I mean, we could talk all night, and I know you're a busy man. Why don't we wrap up with? I want to get your thoughts on how different, or rather how similar, this new defense with Raheem Morris is going to be. Losing Brandon Staley, it feels weird, right? They were the number one defense, and then they lose their defensive coordinator like the next day, it seems like. So what do you make of this? Because I'm actually pretty high on Raheem Morris, and I was really interested to see, the difference once they got rid of Dan Quinn in Atlanta. And I don't think Dan Quinn's a bad coach by any means, but I think it was time for him to leave. Um, the way they played down the stretch with Raheem Morris, I felt like he definitely got everybody going, and I felt like the team improved in general. But what are your thoughts on him, with the Rams, and can this defense get back to where they were with Raheem Morris?
Yeah, well, I think it'll be challenging because their defense was that good,
Yeah.
and the numbers are incredible for what the Rams were able to do. There's a lot of hype, and I talked about it in the video that I did, where they really started to become a too high predominant defense, and it's a lot of quarters coverage, a lot of cover two, and what that does is even the numbers in the box in terms of the amount of blockers and the amount of defenders. And that can be really challenging for the defense because it leaves you out gapped. That means there's an open gap in terms of running the ball. So when everybody gets blocked up, there will be one open gap. And if everybody gets blocked up, there isn't an extra guy to come in and hit the ball carrier. So the Rams were actually one of the best run defenses last year, which is mind blowing. It's incredible because everybody else is playing one high for the most part, where they have enough guys in the box to fit all the gaps and have that extra guys hitting the running back. So I think with Raheem Morris, I think he's going to do aspects of what Staley did. We know he's a Tampa 2 predominant guy, so I think he will base out of the too high stuff still. I'll be interested to see if they're still stopping the run at the same level as they did this last year. I'll be really interested to see. What I really liked about what Staley did was he put the most stress on his best players. So Aaron Donald had to swallow up all these blocks, but also still be dominant and rush the passer and sack the quarterback a million times and blow up runs for TFLs and whatnot. And Jalen Ramsey was often put one-on-one, push all the coverage away from him, just lock down the best receiver and be on an island, just classic, Revis, Ramsey, those type of guys type stuff. So I'll be interested to see if Raheem Morris is able to also put that stress on those players. Sometimes it doesn't necessarily fit with your philosophy or with your scheme, where those guys are still going to be very good, but are you asking them to do that same level of stuff where you can kind of let everybody else, all the different guys in your defense, the Joseph Days, the John Johnsons, all these guys really elevate. And those guys are good players, but when you put more stress on Donald and he's eating double teams, or where Ramsey is just one-on-one, doesn't need safety help, doesn't need linebacker help inside in zones, that's critical. And it's so important that the Rams have these two, goats, if you will. It's so important that they have these guys. I want to see for Raheem Morris how much he's going to go towards the Staley stuff. Is that going to make him get away from his own philosophy, which can be detrimental? You can't just copy and paste somebody else's scheme, and there's plenty of times and instances in NFL history where that doesn't work. So how is he going to kind of blend his philosophy with what Staley did, and how is he going to deploy Donald and Ramsey in a way to make them as effective last year with still keeping those same results, is what I'll be interested in.
Man, I appreciate you, man. It's been a lot of fun talking about this. I mean, like I said, we could go on and on and on. I mean, so much about the game, and it's really cool because I've been watching your videos for a while, and then actually getting to talk with you in person, or rather over StreamYard. It's pretty cool. So I really do appreciate you, taking the time. I hope you guys enjoyed. This was your treat. Like, the majority of my subscriber base, big Rams fans. So this was a pretty Rams-centric show. Alex, thank you so much. You brought so much to the table. Guys, that's going to do it. So hope you guys enjoyed. I'll be cutting up different clips because there's a lot of great stuff from this live stream. I don't want to go have it go unsaid or unnoticed. So I will be posting those throughout the week. But that's going to do it for us. For me, I'm Jake Ellenbogen. He is Alex Rollins, and my very special guest. Be sure to go subscribe to his channel for all of your NFL content. The guy goes nonstop with the video breakdowns, and just in the best way I can describe it. I think you do a really good job of truly breaking it down so anybody can know like what you're talking about. You don't go too over the top. I mean, I can follow you, understand it. I think you're a really good teacher, Alex, and I appreciate you.
Thank you, man. No, I appreciate the kind words, and yeah, I'm just really trying to reach fans and kind of grow the general knowledge of the game, because it's the best game there is, no doubt about it. And I appreciate you having me on, Jake, and it was a blast, man. I love talking ball.
Absolutely. All right, guys. You know, we're heading out. You guys have a great night, and I'll talk to you guys soon. Later.